Ciao, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tech Exec Podcast, where I help you create teams worth leading, because life's too short to lead mediocre teams. As always, I'm your host, Aviv Ben-Yosef, tech executive, coach, and consultant, and our subject today is greedy leadership algorithms. Before getting started, I want to say that I've got a special offer going on right now for Unplugged with Aviv, which is my offer where you get access to a live stream with me at least once a month and can ask questions, get answers, reply to them privately, etc. And right now is the best price I've had since it has launched. So grab it right now. The discount is for life once you grab it. Details are in the show notes. Now let's talk about greedy leadership algorithms. If you've learned real computer science at university, you probably know what a greedy algorithm is. It's an algorithm that only looks at the best next scenario, next step to take, not looking at the whole problem as a whole, trying to get to the ideal solution, assuming we know everything, but looking always a step or two ahead and choosing what's the best case scenario for that. So we always try to maximize what we get out of the next step. Sometimes this works well. Other times, because of that, you're taking the easiest step as you're walking down the path and you come to a fork in the road and you see that, on the right, it looks like a regular path. On the left, you're going to have to be stepping a bit into mud. So you choose, as a greedy algorithm, that easier path, not realizing that it's going to be much, much, much longer, only for, at the cost of having to step through a bit of mud, like 4 steps. But a greedy algorithm would miss that. What's a greedy leadership algorithm? That's when we make essentially the same types of choices as leaders, and we miss out on what is possible because we keep optimizing for the short term. Because I know so many of you understand this, and you will find it almost obvious. I don't want to go too much right now into why it's important to look at things from a higher altitude at times, but I want to share some meaty, real stories. Like these are not embellished at all. These are all true stories I've witnessed, and I hope at least, that by hearing those, I might be able to help you become more attuned to when you're doing something similar. Because once you actually have these real life scenarios, not just, in theory, I understand that I might be looking into the short term too much, but equipped with some real scenarios, I hope you'll notice it better. So let's zip through those fast, because I know you've got some real work to get to today, right? First scenario is about a startup that I got to see right as they started, as in the founders raised some money, hired their first 4 or 5 engineers and got to it. And those initial engineers, they were all amazing. They were all senior, very capable. And the CTO decided to create the team that's entirely full stack. Each one of those engineers was not in any way confined to a specific tech stack or a specific set of solutions. Each one could do everything the company needed in theory. They had the ability, and that's actually part of the appeal for getting those brilliant engineers on board. They were promised the ability to access everything, understand the entire system, have ownership through and through, learn everything as the team was developing, etc., etc. On paper, amazing. However, once they got started, the CEO got very much hooked on quick execution. How quick? As quick as possible. So when that happened, very, very fast, even though each one of the engineers had the ability of doing everything else, they kept going down the same routes. Each one, every week, that person working on that part of the system, that person working on making the UI better, that person working on the database, and every week, because they always had like the rush of, we have to crank out every single piece of code that we can in any single week. We never let go. We never stop. We never do anything that's not deliver unless something's on fire. When that's the case, the greedy algorithm of a leader is, okay, so Alice always does database, he's going to do it much faster. Bob always does that part, let him keep doing it. You keep repeating it, and with time, within a few months, they got into a situation where it was no longer a team. Each person was entirely engulfed in their little corner, surrounded by their systems, their code, how they do things. Yeah, they collaborated, but they weren't really working together as a team. The whole concept that they had of, okay, we're actually going to be working harder because we're hiring people who are full stack, people who are not specialized in any specific area. Then, having made that decisions, we threw that aside. We let everyone become a specific expert in a specific point and just burn him out. What ended up happening there was that before they even reached a year, yeah, they had an okay delivery rate. Like the velocity of the team was very nice. And still, it came at the cost of having everyone remain so like in a desert. Each one there was not really collaborating with anyone else. They were collaborating more with the CTO as their manager and with people in product than they were collaborating internally. Even most of the code reviews by that point became code reviews done by the CTO and not by peers to one another. And again, they haven't even reached a year where when people started burning out, people started saying, okay, this is not what I signed up for. I was expecting to work on things with throughout the system, understand entirely what's happening so I can do features end to end and talk to product and blah, blah, blah. I mean, I agree with that mindset, but that was the whole spiel that was going on. And then people were saying, I've had it. 2 of their engineers were at the brink of quitting. 1 ended up leaving. And what did we get out of this greedy algorithm? Yeah, we got an okay delivery rate. Nothing, through the roof, but yeah, okay, very nice. At the cost of having to get a star engineer leave us very early because they have had it. And also, we've created this system, this culture that's entirely disconnected from one another. So we actually lost one of the edges that we were hoping to get, and we have harmed how people viewed their roles because that's why they joined. They joined with a specific idea in mind and they were robbed of it. And when that happened, you lost a bunch of trust. People became burned out. People became disgruntled. And that's the sort of thing that it then takes you months to correct. All because you kept optimizing for this sprint and this sprint and this sprint, never taking a second to realize what would you like to see happen over the course of the next few sprints. Another example is another startup I saw where the founders were solely focused on getting the next quarter done. They had specific results they had in mind. They already had a few engineers, but they felt like they needed more in order to get better. And the CEO came to the CTO and said, I don't care what, we need more engineers yesterday. We don't have time to wait. We cannot keep allowing you to go through all of your interviews till you find that unicorn that you're looking for. I don't care. We want engineers right now. Go and find them for me as quick as possible. If you cannot, maybe you're not cut out to be a CTO. That's, along the lines of what was told. Why? Because, again, the CEO was really optimizing for the next couple of weeks, couple of months, and not looking at things as a whole. What ended up happening? They brought in a few people who were actually quite horrible. People who created code fast, but code that ended up not being sustainable, not being really usable, that blew up in their faces real quick. And those people actually then made it much harder to find those right engineers when they had a bit more time, because star engineers looked at the team, looked at what was going on, looked at the code and said, I don't want to be part of that. When you talk to other engineers, you ask them, how's the day going? Like, how does a regular week look like? Star engineers can very quickly notice if this is a team of their caliber or not. And looking at that, they're saying, okay, I don't want to get there. And that made it just all that much harder to find people. Now, again, if they had no option, what could they have done, right? If you're thinking that to yourself, I'm thinking the CEO could have at least looked at things not just entirely at the level of the next week or two, but try to do something else. I would have rather find some external boutique and pay more for those few months than just hire anyone who would agree and was available from this week to the next, because those usually are not the star people, right? That's another thing that you have to think about here. That team essentially took 3 months to do something that was basic, and then they had to waste a lot more time trying to get the right people to join. They came out short all over the place. And the last story is about someone who, again, looked at the greedy algorithm. This is a head of engineering who told me, yeah, I have 3 essentially terrible people here. This was someone who was just hired for the team as a new leader. He assessed the engineering team. He saw that 3 people were very much lacking, and yet he did not decide to cut them immediately, even though he said that their output was extremely low and not good quality. He looked at the team and said, okay, we need all the help we can get. I'm going to have these people stay on until I finally hire some replacements. He was just looking at the next week or two, thinking about how can he somehow scrape any extra line of code. So he said, I'm going to leave those people here for longer, for a couple of more months. What ended up happening, again, I hope you start sensing what's coming, and that's the team actually did not move as fast as he had hoped. They had to spend a lot of time hand-holding for these not right engineers, because they had to make sure that whatever they were doing wasn't harming things. They didn't blow up the system. They had to tell them what to do. They had to review what they were doing a lot more rigorously when it came to the other engineers. And again, when it came to hiring replacements, eventually when they got replacements, because they were just 3 so-so engineers out of a healthy team in general, when the new engineers were hired and a few weeks later 3 people were sacked, those people, those new engineers were like, oh, what's going on? Like, is the company in trouble? This really sends the wrong message to people. And it also sends a wrong message to those other okay engineers that you had in the team ahead of time, because they understand that, okay, you let those people stay only because it was completely out of our own interest, not giving them any feedback, not giving them any notice. And that's not how I think you want to treat people. But again, this is greedy algorithm thinking. And what you ended up doing in that case specifically was also not gaining anything, because I believe they spent more time managing those poor engineers than compared to what they would have achieved had they let go of them sooner and used all the time they were now given by not having the overhead of managing them to just deliver more, because they were really delivering essentially nothing of value during those couple of months. All of this to say that, yeah, when you're doing greedy algorithm leadership, you're very likely missing out on a bunch of things. What are you supposed to do? Like, what's your takeaway from this episode? Now that I've told you a few stories, maybe they're horror stories, but there are still, maybe they're more like scary stories, but they're still true. And I hope you have some takeaways from them. Let's help you get there. Your role is stressful. I know that you're always stressed for something. There's always more that you need to do than you can. There's always something new on your plate. Yeah, your role is not an easy one. That said, the shift from solely looking at things short term to having the ability of considering what are the trade-offs, what I'm doing, this is what leadership is all about. This is also why as a default, I always refrain from Kanban, because it has this ability of saying, screw it, we don't need to actually think about things. We don't need to be leadership as leaders. We don't need anything with a vision. We're just throwing things at it, and we're always just prioritizing what's currently most important. That's not leadership as a whole. That's essentially us saying we're just doing what Jira's telling us to do. If you're only optimizing for specifically how do I get by in the next week, again, you're not leading. You're sort of dragging yourself and your team through the sprints. You as a leader need to notice when you're selling yourself short, when you're making decisions that you know are not the right decisions just because you're hoping to get another feature or two, just because you're afraid of what might happen with a specific deadline. Of course, you always have to take everything into consideration. And if we're talking about, a make it or break it sort of deal for the company before closing a major round of financing or whatever, okay, I get it. Sometimes you have to do what you have to do. But the plain truth is that the vast majority of time, we're telling ourselves that we have to do something when we don't actually. This is just an excuse because it's easier, because we're too risk averse. But the right decisions oftentimes are going to pay off not just short term, not just long term, but also short term. And I think that if you do that, you will actually have a chance of creating a team that you're proud of leading, a team that can do something remarkable. That's it for this week. Thank you for joining me. As always, do check out my newsletter if you're not subscribed yet, where you're going to get every week my newsletter, this podcast, a video, and a bunch of goodies like the special offering I talked about when we started. Details for everything are in the show notes, and I'll see you here next week. Ciao.